And good afternoon, Frankston. Welcome to the penultimate Sunday session before the end of the election period. There's only 6 more days to go. We're very excited. I'm sure you're very excited. It's almost as riveting as watching the New Zealand election unfold yesterday or the ACT election. There's been no sausages served during this election, which I am personally quite sad about. But we're back for our Sunday session. It's the last one before the end of the election period. We are going to have a last policy discussion on Tuesday at the usual time of 5 o'clock. So hopefully everyone will still be able to join us. It'll be the last opportunity for the candidates that are joining us to put their policy pitches to you. So we've entitled Tuesday's session, Candid Conversation, Policy Overload. I'm looking forward to it. I'm sure you are as well. It's been a very interesting week, and the week ahead looks very interesting as well. But before we start, I want to say a very big welcome to Rupinder Singh, who's candidate for the North East Ward, who's joining us today for the first time. Rupinder, we've been trying to get you on the show for a little while, and I know that it's been challenging with all the various other bits and pieces going on in life. But would you like to take a couple of minutes just to tell us a bit about yourself and what you hope to achieve in the North East Ward?
Thanks, Steve. How are you? I would like to join this conversation. Like I was trying for a while, but due to the commitments, my apologies, I couldn't join. And everybody knows that my name is Rupinder Singh, and I'm running for North East Ward. I'm living in Carrum Downs for over 10 years now. And I got my kids going to the school, working locally, and I've noticed that in Carrum Downs, Skye, and in North East Ward in particular, that we've been left behind in the development. The major thing that I've noticed is that the Wedge Road Reserve's been developed. But I think that's been, that was planned probably, I think it's 2014 or 2004, just correct me. Yeah, but I think we could have done better, especially in this area, like since we got a lot of families and even the elderlies, the infrastructure that could have improved over the years. For some reason, like Frankston City Council's got a big budget. So raising $180 million is a lot of money to invest into the infrastructure. And due to the, all my commitments as well, I couldn't sort of get involved into politics much. But I just realized, I should put my hand up and see if I could make any change in the community. So I thought, let's give it a run and see if we can win the election and make a change for better.
Great, thank you very much, Rupinder. And I understand this is the first time that you've had a run at council, which I think is the same for all of us, actually, we're all sort of first-time candidates as well. How have you found the whole experience of campaigning?
Oh, well, having no experience, it was quite challenging. At the same time, I guess it would be challenging for all of you guys as well. With the managing with work and kids and homeschooling during that time as well, which was, I think it was quite tough. Yeah, but we managed through. I did what I can, trying to manage in between times. I think I'll be better planned next time if I take a chance to run for the council.
Well, look, it's great to have you join us, and looking forward to hopefully you can join us again on Tuesday as well when we do policy overload. I'm just going to work around the room before we get on to some of the things that have popped up during the week, things like the demolition of the Pancake Parlour, amongst others. But Justin, how's your week been?
Sorry, I was just on mute. Hi, everyone. Look, week's been fairly consistent. I've noticed that things are starting to slow down in terms of inquiry, and that's not just with me. That's online. I think as we sort of get to the end of the election period, people have made their choices. There are still quite a few that are coming through and asking some great questions. There are some weird and wonderful ones, which I'm sure we've all received them. A lot that don't particularly relate to council or what we can do as council. But look, it's interesting all the same to receive those. That's about all the reflection I have for this week. I'm sorry, it's going to be very, very short and sweet.
That's all right. There's plenty of news that's been going on in the last week that we can come back around to. Shane, how's your...
Oh, it's actually been great. Like, I've just been returning messages and all. Yeah, just it's still going. It probably lulled out probably during the week. I think a lot of people had voter fatigue, I'd call it, but just probably in the last day or so, most of the forums have sprung back up. I think a lot of people have had a look, obviously, at their voting forms and gone, whoop, we're running out of time. So but it's actually really good, just seeing exactly what is required. Like, even with Rupinder, he'd know exactly where our ward sits in terms of what needs to get done and what priorities they have. So a lot of people are concerned that the money is not exactly spent where it should be. So if the rates are high, they don't mind if the rates are high, as long as the money is well spent and spent carefully. So if it's, and that's something that we'll have to address. Like, obviously, if we're all successful moving forward, we'll need to address that, is to get rid of the impression of the waste, and just make sure that the money's going to where it's needed, especially in that we're coming out of the stage 4, businesses, mental health, all that stuff. So in terms of bigger projects, we could probably look at just getting back into basics in terms of mental health, just like roads, footpaths, all that kind of stuff. And that's a lot of the stuff. It's not just me just going, oh yeah, I've just got that. No, that's actually feedback from the people from Carrum Downs, Skye, Sandhurst, and most of Langwarrin, which is half of your ward as well. So it's going forward and just trying to keep the lines of communication open, and that's hopefully by us doing this and keeping it going, that people don't feel that it's us versus them. It's more we're working for them, so we can just rebuild. So that's pretty much what I've got from this week, is more of a reflection of the whole process. So that means if we're all going to get elected, then going forward, we need to keep that process up. Do you know what I mean? So so that's what I've got from that. Thanks.
Great. Thanks very much, Shane.
Okay.
Sue, over to you. You're on mute, Sue.
Hi, everyone.
There we go.
Had to happen. I have run out of words. It's the end of the week. Good to be here again. Hello to everyone. Hello to all of you. The week's been good, interesting, with a whole range of different questions, and I just jotted down some of the topics before joining the call, so perhaps I'll raise some of those throughout the time we have together this afternoon, because there's some of the detailed questions that voters are raising, and some of them have been an education for me, because I'm not a young parent anymore, and so some of the issues that affect young parents would be different from me. So that's been great. I had a couple of people in the ward put their hands up to put up posters for me on their fences this week, which was awesome. So big shout out to Vanessa and Grace. They'll know who they are. So that was a busy day yesterday, putting together posters to make a bigger A3 size poster to go on people's fences. One thing I will do, because one of the pieces of feedback was, oh yeah, I heard your name, Sue. Then I realised I've been watching you on Stephen's show, and then I realised you were in North West Ward. So if I may, can I just do a reminder for everyone who's watching at the moment that both Justin and I are running in North West Ward. Rupinder and Shane are running in Northeast Ward, and Brad and Stephen are running in the South Ward. So it's always great to get a bit of feedback. You think you're on point with your communication, but sometimes you need somebody to say, no, can you just remind us? The reason I've got the Seaford Pier up behind me today is there was a shout out in the week from the 3199 Beach Association to wander out and pick up some litter for an hour or two. So that's what I did this morning on the beach between Seaford and going further down towards Long Island. And it was great. I felt a really good citizen for doing that for an hour or so. In my t-shirt, of course.
Fantastic, Sue. and you know, just touching on, you know, you've got there's a couple of candidates here from North West Ward, but who should we vote for first?
I won, Justin.
Justin, you're on mute. You're on mute, Justin. Sorry, we didn't hear.
Good afternoon, Brad. Welcome. How's your week been?
Hectic week. You know, the campaign has been long and interesting, and you know, I'm sure I speak for all of us. We've all learned things in this campaign. We've learned a lot about the community. We've learned how to advocate. We've learned how, you know, how to listen, I guess. How to listen to the community. I've had a number of people reach out to me, having seen I was running, with their issues, their concerns about the place that we live here in Frankston, and you know, I've learned about stuff that I didn't know about. So I've met some great people in Frankston that I hadn't met before. So yeah, that's now starting to wind up. And even if I wasn't successful this week, this election, I hope I am successful. But if I'm not, you know what? I'm a richer person because of it. That's what I'd say. So I'm looking forward to the end of this campaign. I'm looking forward to a result. We all want to know what the people have decided for us, and you know, I say bring that on.
Brilliant, fantastic. Thank you, Brad. Rupinder, did you want to reflect just on this week before we get on to the news items of the week?
Yeah, not much. You know, just doing more promotion just on a Facebook and to local pages where people, some are genuinely asking a question, you know, which you can respond to, and some of the questions it's a little bit hard from as a candidate to answer because you're not in the government as yet. But we try to answer all the questions to our best knowledge. But other than that, like because of this COVID, couldn't really do any door knocking, and not so much of the letterbox drops. So I had a few co-flutes put up last weekend. Some of them got stolen or they've been taken out. Yeah, but there are a few still there, which I've noticed. But apart from that, not so much discussion out in the public, as most of you would have noticed that as well. But apart from that, it has been a good week. I had to talk to a few people, responding to your messages, emails, and some of those groups sending emails as well. Most of the questions is general, like, are you aligned with any political party? Which is the same answer for every question or every email comes through, that I'm not aligned with any political party running as independent. But apart from that, it has been a good week.
Fantastic. Thank you. My week's been, it's been pretty jam-packed, actually. I mean, apart from obviously working with all of you, the other challenge has been just keeping on top of the number of messages. I actually thought things would have tailed off quite a bit by now. But even today, I'm still having phone calls with people who want to talk to me about particular concerns that they have. And it's everything from concerns about local traffic and traffic safety through to concerns around the quality of social housing that's in our area, through to how we're going to get businesses back up and running as well. And it's been a really, I'm enjoying each of those conversations, but it's been, I think as Brad said, it's been a real eye-opener about different things. And actually there's a few things that I've encountered over the last week, such as the Seaford housing group that I'd be actually really keen to stay engaged with, even irrespective of what the outcome is of this election as well. We might just move on to some of the news items for the week. Pancake Parlour, it's gone. It seems to be a lot of people who are, on the one hand, happy that it's gone because it had become quite derelict and had become somewhere that a lot of people who were homeless were staying. But then again, the question is, where have they now gone? Are they being looked after? But on the other hand, there's a lot of people that feel a deep connection to the Pancake Parlour, and its rather unique architecture is probably the way I'd describe it. I certainly know when I used to live in Mornington, driving past it, and you'd always know you were going through Frankston because you were driving past the Pancake Parlour. Thoughts on whether it's a good thing, a bad thing, and what do we do about the other bits and pieces of disappearing history around Frankston?
Steve, look, it's actually good you brought it up, because there was a post I was reading a little bit earlier today on Frankston history. And look, definitely the Pancake Parlour was sort of where this started, from what I understood. But then it also went on to talk about the old Presbyterian church, which was pushing 100 years old, that was paid for by the community and fitted out and so on and so forth. And it sort of begged the question, and the feedback in there, look, I did contribute to it, but I'm not going to go into, essentially everything that I said, but the guts of it is, I think in terms of planning, and this is something that keeps coming up as well when we talk about value. I think we need to find, with buildings that are of value, not necessarily in a historic sense, but community value, we need to try and find some ways to perhaps incorporate those into the forward progression of the city. And whether or not that means that's set aside and then that's restored as a part of whatever becomes of that particular site, whether or not it's a case of that building is incorporated into what the new building is. That's something from where I'm from in Tassie, that's something that's done quite often. Having that building as sort of a focal point. What's a good example in Melbourne? Melbourne Central. Yeah. Melbourne Central would be a prime example of that. And I'm not necessarily talking about everything that's high density either. But the biggest part is recognising the value of those significant buildings, and not just the buildings themselves. There are things like fountains, there are things like lead light windows. It's not just the actual building. I guess it's the sum of all its parts, and how we could, rather than let these go, perhaps reuse them, work out a way of how we can recognise them, where we can place them, and how they can continue to be a part of the community for the community's benefit. So that was a big part that popped up today. Yeah, and I think it's really important that you look at how, just because something is old doesn't necessarily mean that it still has value, in the sense of community or what it does in terms of the kind of urban landscape that we live in, because there can also be newer buildings. I can remember when they did Federation Square, big debates about whether the SEC, or it was the gas and fuel building, should be retained or not. And they were sort of I thought they were quite ugly, but they were quite ugly sort of concrete buildings built in the 60s or 70s, and there were people who were saying, no, we have to preserve them. But then, on the other hand, there are old buildings that don't have character about them. And I think that's probably the important word there. Is it's about what provides the character. What we don't want, before COVID, went out to Ballarat to see some friends, and Ballarat's got some fantastic examples of a mixture of kind of older architecture and design with some of the newer things. But we stopped on the way back in, I think it was somewhere like Caroline Springs, which is a brand new suburb, and everything looked the same. We don't want Frankston to look like that.
And so I think you're spot on about kind of mixing up the old and the new. Any other thoughts on the pancake parlour / history question?
Well, just picking up on the use of old buildings, we talked about the Frankston signal box a few weeks ago, and that could be a good example of working to preserve it in the short term, but then as the CBD comes back to life, we get more investment, we get more opportunities to build and use buildings that could become something else. It's still the old signal box, but maybe it's a really nice restaurant or cafe or retail outlet or something. So it's got multiple uses then, and the purposes are more broadly spread. So yeah, I think that kind of planning overlay and the idea of how to progress with historical buildings as a principle is really important to have, and agree.
I think it's important to differentiate between historical and heritage buildings and just old buildings. You know, everyone liked the pancakes at the pancake parlour, but I'm not sure that makes it historical or significant or anything like that. The railway signal box absolutely is, I think, a part of our transport history, and is unique and ought to be preserved. It's currently in use by the railways. I've known people who have worked in it. They tell me it's a bit rickety and a bit creaky when the wind starts to blow. So it'll need work if we're to keep it. It will become obsolete as they change the technology, and I understand that is all quite old and slated for replacement. And you know what, we might even have to relocate it. But the problem with that structure is it's rather awkward to use because it's upstairs. There's no lift. It's not compliant with any of the disability access. It's not that large inside, you know, so if you put a cafe or a bar or whatever in there, it's going to be quite small, and access is an issue. So, you know, there were some old structures at the railway station at Cheltenham. The whole station has got redesigned, and they removed them, they refurbished them, they've repositioned them at the station. I think that's terrific. But what I'm trying to say is that we need to be practical as well.
Shane,
no, I was just going to jump in just about the cinema, the old cinema, just on Nepean Highway. So there was a post that did come up, was a couple of weeks ago, about the design of the roof. You know, the chandelier. That you know, that was you know, in terms of preserving stuff like that. Incorporate it into different buildings, even the entrance to, say, Skybus Stadium, you know, the big gates down on the water side, just things of significance or history that don't really cost a great deal in terms of infrastructure increases. So to say, if you want different buildings to go on, obviously you want them to look good and stuff like that, but you're still preserving the history in the same instance. So you know, that's the main one going forward, is that you're mindful of the history versus the actual value that it gives. So to say, even the Savers building, that's got a big history in terms of, you know, there's a lot of old photos and history in terms of that building. But the thing is it worth keeping it empty and not developing that area because of X? You know, I know that there's a development going in there now, but do we force them to keep certain parts of it that aren't of significant value, but they're old? So Brad touched on that, old versus value, or, you know, of historical value. So yeah, and that's something that definitely should come up in you know, especially in the liaison with the people. So you know, in that process, ask the people what they want to keep. You know, what's the value in it, and that's something that we need to use going forward. So yeah, so it's good arguments there, for and against. You know, you can't stop the progress, but you know, you don't really want to kill it that hard, but you still want to keep the historical value of it. So
yeah,
Rupinder, Shane.
Yep.
That's what the thing is. Like, how can we utilize that historic building? That's the issue. We don't want to leave them vacant. You know,
right.
run down houses or anything. So we just got to find a way, if we can keep the facades, or as you said, you know, what's valuable, if it's a history or if it's the unique structure of it, to keep that alive and still develop, just like they do the historic buildings. They keep the facades, the value, and then just redevelop it at the back of the building. And then the biggest problem would be that who owns those buildings, and if it's public or if it's privately owned, and then are they going to be rented out or tenanted out, or how it can be utilized? That's the biggest issue, I guess. We'll have to work on it, if we can redevelop them and still use those buildings in a way.
I mean, a lot of them, when they are privately owned, you're asking the owner to refurbish and retain, you know, the dimensions of the building and the floor space or whatever. A lot of times it's just not viable, right, for him to do so.
Yeah.
And this is where we have to be careful, because if we demand or require that a building's left alone, and it's only, you know, I don't know, 1 or 2 stories, for example, you know, is it worth spending $1 million on it, or whatever the cost is, to end up with, you know, something that'll provide the owner with a rental return that's quite small in a comparison to the required investment. So if we do that, what you end up with is the building is left alone or derelict. And so we have enough of that around Frankston. It is, we don't need more of it. So we do need to be mindful, and I'm not saying we don't, you know, require that of people, but we do need to be mindful that actually doing that can actually spell the end of the building, because it's then left to rack and ruin, right? You can't actually force an owner to renovate a building. You can stop him from developing it potentially, but you could end up with a situation that's just unviable for him, and then it just falls to rack and ruin. We have enough of that in Frankston already.
Well, that's also. Oh, just sorry, Steve, just to jump in. I've got now there was a heap of posts from Carrum Downs locals regarding the regional and the Bellardo Road shopping centre as well, about the condition of that, and a lot of people going, can't the council force them to do XXX? I'm like, well, it's kind of privately owned. It's a bit of a drama, yeah. So and that's what a lot of the questions were, in terms of how do we improve that, or how do we go forward doing that? Not historical, I'll give you that with the current conversation, but it's how does the council, you know, move forward in terms of getting stuff like that done? Like, it's such a tricky thing. So a lot of people, even in the historical version, they keep the facade, but the back of it, like the SB, like what was going to happen even at the deck. Wasn't there a big thing that was big building over the back? As long as they kept the building and the thing, Brad, you'd probably know a bit more about that, because I remember that being in your. Do you remember that? Like that, well, they had to keep the front of it, didn't they?
Yeah, the facade. Yeah. So you know, that's how, you know, how you try and make it viable, you know, to be, you know, for the building to be used and have some money spent on it, because you know, the developer, the owner, he wants a return on his money, right? So if you know, that row of houses behind the deck along Davey Street, and that's what they are, old houses, and you know, I love them, they're terrific. I'd like to own one and spend a couple of million and live in a really nice place.
You've got good trees there.
That's right. But you know,
big trees.
Yeah, lovely, fantastic. And you can require that, but an owner's going to look at that and say, well, if I spend $1 million on it, you know, fixing it up, I'm going to rent it out at, you know, at $1,000 a week. It just doesn't add up, right? You know, you've got to be realistic. So that's why that's why the council will say, all right, we have to have some medium density housing. We're required to by the state government. We want to have it in the middle of town. That's the best place for it. We will encourage those developers to develop, retain the facade, and that said, you have to work with developers to encourage appropriate development. You can't require them to develop, and you can't have rules that are that strict that it's just left to rot.
Yeah, I think there's a really important component there, which is that it's also about what's the new developments that are coming through. And Diana White's commented in the comments, oddly enough, has commented there that Frankston also needs a new design identity. Yeah. I think this is a role that we can play in as a future council could play if we were to be elected. One of the things we could do is work with developers and landowners who want to build something new to either look at how they incorporate some of those characteristics of existing buildings if they do still have some form of value in them, or when they're building something entirely new, that they incorporate characteristics that represent Frankston. Now, there's going to be, I know last week that the Vicinity Bayside development was approved by the state government. So that's not going to come and hit an incoming council. There will be a huge amount of debate about the design of that building. But I think if a future council is proactive in engaging with developers around design principles and the kinds of characteristics that we want to see, then we can make sure that some of that heritage, if you like, is captured, whether that's Indigenous heritage or whether it's post-colonial heritage or there's some fantastic examples of kind of 1950s architecture around town and bits and pieces like that as well. And actually engaging with people, we can do things a little bit differently, and we can work with those people that are going to help us build a new Frankston, to build it with character. But we've got to kind of say, what's our vision? What do we want the design to be? How do we want it to reflect the seascape that we are attached to, or the wider landscape? If you think about those different, the fact that you can see the Frankston Centre from most parts of Frankston is what do we want that to be for people as well? What do people want it to be for people, more importantly, because that consultation around design is really important. And then how do we then move from the city centre to those other activity hubs that we've got dotted around the municipality?
I'd be really interested to know how all the big pieces of investment, so we've heard about the $562 million investment in the hospital. We know Chisholm TAFE may be getting some more developments, the CBD being developed, the Kooringal Hub development. There's lots of money being invested in Frankston. Talk of a university model, having precincts that connect the hospital, the TAFE, the CBD, and then even the Nepean Highway, if that was to be developed, to then link down to the foreshore. So what is the principle? How are we going to get a feel that it all flows as a city, as opposed to being incremental little developments that are just joined by a road or a path or something? So I'd love to know more about that.
That's a great point, Sue. And I think that what that relates to is having an understanding of the CAD design process and overall planning, but it also involves making sure that we have that plan in place, sort of tying it in with what Steve just said as well, about what our expectations are and how it needs to look, or how we'd like it to look. And when I say we, I mean the collective we, all of us as a community, and how it's appropriate in terms of what our vision's going to be, whether or not there's green spaces incorporated, whether or not it does sort of complement the older sort of stuff, the newer sort of stuff, the beach, the trees, all of the sort of designing parts that your town planners and your CAD designers will traditionally do. But if we've got a brief in place, which I know council does, and it's very, very specific on areas, but if we had an overreaching one as well of sort of expectations, then that'd make their job a lot easier as well. And obviously have a sort of consistent look of the city. Now, just before I jump off my soapbox, there's something I just want to go back to, which is touched on by Rupinder, Brad, and Shane, when we're talking about development, part of what we've got to recognise as well is every developer in there is going to do their due diligence and their feasibility study. And at the end of the day, it comes down to a very, very, very simple financial choice. So the average developer is looking at between 12 and 20% return at the end of all of this. So we've got to be careful in the pyramid of value, which is your heritage, your cultural, your community, and your fiscal. Our pyramid of value, to make sure that it's not too tight either, that we sort of push all of these people away because it becomes too hard or it becomes unfeasible. But at the same time, we need to be able to balance and incorporate all of those things that I just said before. Which, look, it sounds very simple when you say it out aloud on a video now, but in actual application, it's certainly not that simple at all.
Cool. Yeah, going back to that Nepean Highway development, I guess it's much needed to develop Nepean Highway to get that rejuvenation into the town. There's only a few things that we noticed that in the plan, that speed limit is one of the issues, and then how are we going to get the overflow of the traffic? We don't want it to become a bottleneck. Adding all those the car parking and the trees right in the middle. I guess it has to be sort of looked at how it can be sort of implemented in a way that we can attract people rather than people turning away.
Look, let me ask a question just to everybody. There's a lot of talk about rejuvenating Nepean Highway. What's your views on the priority? If you're going to rejuvenate anything in central Frankston, is Nepean Highway the priority, or is it Young Street, or is it Davey Street, or is it? There's a lot of people advocating for Nepean Highway, and I'm just wondering if that's everyone's view, that that's our primary target or not.
Not mine, because Carrum Downs, Skye, Sandhurst, and Langwarrin are my priority. That's it. So all the talk about how most of the questions are all banked towards the CBD, and I do appreciate that is part of the bigger picture. But in terms of rejuvenating anything, I think the time it needs to swings and roundabouts need to come back into the suburbs a little bit in terms of getting some more spending and all that before we look at beautifying an entrance to the CBD. Like I'd concentrate on getting businesses back up and running. Like I've been talking about the mental health, like the side of it, and that's quite a big thing in this whole election process was, so in terms of beautifying an entrance to the CBD, no, I don't see it as a bigger priority as getting the world back to where we need it to be in terms of everyone's got a job, the area's prospering, everyone's okay with that in terms of the mental health side of it as well. And even just the smaller things, even just the footpaths, all that kind of stuff. So, in the suburban areas, not so much as putting brand new Norfolk pines in an entrance, like what happened Cranny Road, and that caused a big stir. Probably how many months ago in council meeting, that caused a big stir, and that's, they're Indigenous or they're not Indigenous. I don't think they're Indigenous, but they're certainly got value to Frankston identity, and I know why they picked them, but I think it was the delivery and how they picked them and all that stuff that was the problem on that. But yeah, so in terms of the inclusion in Nepean Highway or the discussion in Nepean Highway beautification, I don't see it as a priority, and I'm sure, and even the conversation with Rupinder, I don't think he sees it as a priority either, because the northeast itself has got bigger priorities. That's
Let me jump in and answer your question, Brad, probably a little bit more clearly. So yeah. I think we're getting caught up on a specific topic as opposed to a specific goal. So if the Nepean Highway revitalisation is what business needs in Frankston in order to give it that kickstart that it's going to need coming out of COVID and the recession, that is absolutely what I think we need to do. In terms of, you know, when we're talking about wards and what wards needs, yes, that's absolutely important. But coming back to what the question was, do you support it? Yes, I do. If that's what business needs to have for us to support them at a council level in order to perhaps be a bit more attractive and have some sort of symbiotic investment back in from them and from us in order to help them succeed.
And on that topic, I'm just reminded of a couple of weeks ago when there was an announcement that there would be some state funding from a community and Vic Roads program at federal government level, I believe. So to put money into developing somewhere where there is a road and there is a community that could be impacted as a result. So the Nepean Highway revitalisation lends itself to that. There's a timeline on the budget that's been made available of just 12 months, so through to the end of next year. So I think when the new council gets together and meets, it'll be really, really important to have a really big picture view of, you know, where is their funding, what are the issues that need to be addressed, short, medium, long term, and then filtering down to how does that translate to support Northeast Ward, Northwest Ward, South Ward, because there are then very definitely, I would say, you know, using the quick wins terminology, some items like a poorly equipped playground that's been in desperate need of some proper swings or something for ages. But rather than getting caught up with masses of those small projects, still being able to keep an eye on what are the bigger, longer term projects that council also needs to work on. And as councillors, we need to properly govern and make decisions on when working with the CEO and his council staff. So I think there's so much to do, so many things to do. I think that as a team is going to be one of our biggest challenges, just ensuring we can prioritise those short, medium and long-term views between here and 2040. And I don't know about you, but I don't have a personal vision for the next 20 years, but we're going to be asked to do that for Frankston, you know, make some decisions around what is the plan for this community over 20 years that we can all then work to. Yeah, so yes is my answer to Brad. I think it's it's something we need to consider, and I wouldn't just rule it out right now. And it's not all in the Northwest Ward either. So anyway, it's a city thing.
I thought everything was in the Northwest Ward, Sue.
Tell him, Sue, it's the centre. It's the centre of the universe, the Northwest Ward.
Yeah. I
Point
think,
of order. Point of order.
I think the Nepean Highway precinct revitalisation is important, but I don't think it's the number one priority. We've got to get the baseline of business back up and running, but also we can revitalise the Nepean Highway all we want, but if we don't then also fix the frankly dead heart of the Frankston CBD to give people a reason to stop beyond just the beach or the fantastic cafes or restaurants that are there, then sorry, that was my fire brigade pager. Then it's going to be, you know, it'll look nice, but you know, it'll be sort of all Christmas tinsel and no Christmas tree, if you like. And also, I think as we need to look at what's the impact of this of COVID-19 and the recession across the whole of the city as well. And if I think about the number of times I've heard over the last year the mention of Coringal or the mention of Langwarrin or the mention of Sandhurst or Carrum Downs by council, it very seldom comes into conversation. And I think we need to take a much broader view as a collective council going into the new term than just the CBD. Yes, the CBD is important. Yes, the Nepean Highway is important. Yes, we can drive a lot of growth and jobs and economic activity through there, but Frankston is more than just that. And I think that whatever configuration a new council takes, it's got to look more broadly than just those areas.
Yeah. Frankston North, I'll add to that too.
Well said. Well said. I think I touched on that. No,
Sorry, Sue,
that's-
what did you
yeah.
say then?
I was going to say, and I'll add Frankston North to Stephen's list of suburbs that need some
It's-
attention.
No, you're absolutely right.
The-
Frankston North's
the
always on the front of
Pines.
the list, but
What
it
about-
is a
what about the
multi-vector approach,
Pines?
Steve. You're absolutely right.
So look, I'm going to. I'm just conscious of. I'm conscious of time. There's a couple of other things I wanted to touch on. History's come up a couple of times this week. I'm sure you've all seen the story of Humphrey B. Hill and the famous statue that's on the foreshore. Oliver Hill's grandfather, I think it was, who famously saved some simple fisher folk whose boat had capsized in a rickety box. Storytelling is a really important part of any place's character and history and culture. How would we make sure that the stories of Frankston and stories of Frankston folk heroes are properly shared across our city?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. Along the boardwalk of Frankston between the pier and Oliver's Hill is perfect because along there people stop. There's a couple of signs saying stay off the vegetation, but that'd be a perfect spot. And there is actual stories already on there, but expanding them to explain a bit of the history, that would be a great thing. I think that would be a great spot as well, and that wouldn't be impacting on the sand dunes or anything. You have it actually attached to the boardwalk itself.
Mm-hmm.
It would be a great call to action for local arts and events and musicians and people to let's have a stories of Frankston theme to an event or something going on at the Arts Centre, just to help write these stories and share them going way back. So yes, maybe something to throw out to people, because I agree, the more you tell stories and then they get repeated, they become part of the character of a place, and that can help shape the identity. Agreed.
Sorry for the screaming in the background of my end here. I guess we've got to take into account the oral history. Then we'll have the sort of documented history, and then it's some keystones out of that we'd like to put down as a sort of permanent reminder, and where that is and how that looks is something that I think we should throw back to the community and ask them where they'd like to see it and how they'd like to see it sort of presented. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the people of Frankston. That Frankston is a sum of all of its parts.
John Rupinder.
Yeah, I agree with Justin. That we need things to be like anything about history or any amusement or anything that need to be spread out, so people can sort of have a look around Frankston as well. So one of my focus was to promote Frankston as a tourist destination town, not just a transit town as its last station at the moment. So we want people to sort of come in and explore Frankston and go past Frankston as well. So it's a Kringle shopping centre, for instance, come down to Frankston North. We need to put a few things there, along Balata Road, in our area, in Carrum Downs, Langwarrin. So everywhere we need to have a few things where we can encourage people to travel around and have a look around, rather than just focusing just along the foreshore.
That's a good thing, a good example of the sculpture park, which kids love going down to, just on McClellan Road, and that's a really good spot. If everyone is listening or hasn't been there, I suggest go down there. It's actually, but it's closed at the moment, but it's a great spot. Like, there's a lot of stuff, Cruden Farm, all that stuff. There's plenty of staff around, even with the fauna parks, so the Pines. The Langwarrin one, which is further up into your ward, Stephen, and Brad, they're great spots. Like what they've done to even the front part of the Pines flora and fauna, where the Peninsula Link has gone in, it's gone leaps and bounds. Like when I first moved into Carrum Downs, was it 2002? The park itself, like even the tracks were a bit, hit and miss. Yeah. Now they're spot on. Now they've got the fire trails. They've got almost street markings in it. Do you know what I mean? So, and like, even with the invention of the maps, like on the phone, you don't get lost in there anymore. Do you know what I mean? It's like, and they're upgrading it for concrete paths, so the bikes, the shared paths, and all that stuff, where it used to be just deep sand. So, and now it's created more accessibility for everyone, which is good. And that's the kind of stuff that we need to promote, but also, need to improve on, which is good.
Can I add something else as well? To Shane, that a lot of people wanted to add, the public toilets at Flora Park and Fona. So, which is we understand, which is Parks Victoria, not just the council. But I guess we can advocate to have some public toilets there, a proper pedestrian crossing off Balapa Road to enter in there. There's no crossing there, and it's got a nice picnic area right at the entrance. It needs few bins, and I guess it needs to be improved a bit more so we can attract people, so families can enjoy.
Yeah,
no, certainly. And that's a couple of the posts.
Yeah, and I think the exciting thing is, of course, the best news we've had all week is around the relaxing of some of the restrictions, which, the 25k limit's been lifted, which means we can get back out, and there's those trails that go all the way through to the Seaford wetlands, along the freeway and through there. It means that people who are residents of Frankston City who haven't been able to get to the beach can get back to the beach, and we can get out and we can have, at least with one other household, we can get out and have picnics and so on. So that's, I think that's great news out of this week. And looking forward to things like the hairdressers reopening, because the COVID hair is getting a bit over the top.
The hair's getting a bit long there, Stephen. Yeah.
I know. I'm a little bit concerned. I might get used to it and develop a mullet.
Got a mohawk going.
I don't think you speak for everyone, Steve. I don't think Shane agrees with you there.
I'd just like to make a couple of comments here. We've talked about attracting people of Frankston, marketing Frankston, for turning Frankston into a destination, and there is a lot of things in Frankston to attract people, and I think perhaps they aren't as widely known as around Melbourne as they would have been. McClellan Sculpture Park, especially in our parks and reserves, but attracting people of Frankston is a good thing for Frankston, because they might stop at a restaurant and have a meal and whatever they do, that creates employment here. But Frankston council, our role is for the locals, right? We're really here to look after them, to provide the basic services, to provide what they need, and I think they need to be the priority. I think creating jobs is absolutely a worthy task. I'm not sure it's strictly a council responsibility, but it is something we ought to be doing. And I also note an earlier comment that, if that's what the business community wants and that's what we ought to be doing, I'm not sure we really want to put them front and center. We need to listen to them. We need to work with them. We need to do what we can to encourage our business. But number one is the people of Frankston, right? That's where the priority has to be, in my view.
Interesting point, and the paraphrase there, Brad. I don't necessarily disagree with you, but I guess where I'll challenge you on that note is in terms of whether or not it is or isn't a council perhaps responsibility. We can always facilitate and foster those sort of relationships, so we are looking at the bigger pictures. So coming back to the business side of things, they form a part of the Frankston community as well.
Yes, they do, and that's why we have to work with them. But what I'm thinking about with this Nepean Highway proposal, I mean, there's a lot of areas around Frankston that need redevelopment. Someone somewhere has decided Nepean Highway is the big priority. I don't know how that conclusion was come to. I don't know what the rationale was. I don't know what the other considerations were, and that's why I'm just asking these questions. Why is Nepean Highway number one? What are the other outstanding issues, the other needs that we ought to be looking at before we automatically jump on board the Nepean Highway bandwagon and say, yeah, that's where the money needs to be spent?
Yeah, and I think that's where it's going to be quite critical for the new council to actually come together with the different stakeholders in the city and say, right, this is our map, this is our plan for the next 4 years.
Yeah, and let me be clear, I'm not opposed to it by any means, right? But I just want to have a look at the larger picture. How do we arrive at this conclusion? Where's the money coming from? What's the proposal exactly? Because as well as the cost of the project, there's the opportunity cost. What other opportunities are now discounted because we've headed down that path? Yeah. What else is I think we need to start off the new term of council with that kind of approach, those kinds of questions. What is it we ought to be doing, rather than automatically start the new term that it's the Nepean Highway.
Well
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point.
Yeah.
And and I don't know where it's come from, but that seems to be the outlook. And the Nepean Highway is the big thing.
Yeah, and it did seem to come from left field from the federal budget as well. So I think it's definitely what we need to make sure that we're doing evidence-based decision making.
Correct.
And that includes looking at what are the different alternatives going forward. But what's really going to be important, and this is, I think, where we need to make sure that the new council is, irrespective of who's elected, one of the things we need to make sure happens in the new council is that, firstly, we have proper community consultation, and that includes both residents and business and not-for-profits and all those other interested parties. And the second thing we need to do is to have a council that actually makes decisions going forward, rather than kicking the can down the road or deferring decisions because they don't want to make a decision.
Exactly.
And that's really quite critical. I'm conscious of time. We've still got a week of campaigning to go through. I also know there's been a lot of questions that have come through from different people and on different social media pages about things like campaigning rules, whether sitting councillors can actually use their title as councillor, how the actual election process will take place and when we'll actually know a result, these kinds of things. But also, and I think, Rupinder, you touched on it, things like, your posters disappearing. We've got 1 week left. There's not a huge number of votes that haven't already been decided, even if the ballot papers are still sitting on people's mantelpieces or kitchen tables. But it might just be worth checking in, firstly, on your plans for the week and if you had any concerns around the rules.
You mean the campaigning rules?
The campaigning rules, sorry, yes.
In relation to COVID and the restrictions and so forth.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it has been quite an interesting campaign. Number one, no door knocking, no hanging around the railway station with an A-frame and a stack of leaflets and handing those out. No, so look, we've been restricted in what we can do, even with leaflets. Only allowed out for 2 hours a day and so forth. Is what it is. It has helped some candidates. It hasn't helped others. There are some incumbent councillors that are a bit of a fish out of water, if you like, because it's a different style of campaign they have to run. But look, I think the right call was made. The other alternative was to leave the existing councillors in for another 6 or 12 months, and that isn't anything that I would have supported. So I think under the circumstances, the election has been run well. They've stuck to their democratic principles. The people of Frankston will still have a say, and I think all of us have heard the overwhelming message from the people of Frankston is that they've wanted change. Right, I haven't heard any of them say, "Isn't it terrible that we're having an election?" They're all like, "Yeah, we want change." So, and that's happened. So well done to the VC and the government for having a COVID election in Frankston.
Yep. Shane?
In terms of the election going forward, so my plans, is that the question?
6 days left.
Yeah, so I'll just continue just talking to people. Pretty much, I'm not going to change what I've done. I'm certainly not going to be stopping and thinking that it's over until, probably even after the time, I'll still get questions and all that kind of stuff. If that means that, you can push them through to Snap, Send and Solve for issues and all that kind of stuff. Like I'm quite enjoying that aspect of it, and also just to get a good gauge. So even if I wasn't successful or whatever, I'd certainly be forwarding on to whoever was successful that these are the definite issues, and it's not just me just going, oh, I think that's it. No, it's actually messages. I can physically show you exactly what the general feeling is out in our suburbs, is that they just want a bit of love. Like, even having a second hard rubbish collection straight after this, we go back into stage something. Everyone has a clean out. Let's start again. Do you know what I mean? It's just things like that. And, just restoring a bit of pride into our suburbs. So the thing is, you restore pride into a suburb and people love living there and it looks good and people are taking care of it, then you'll find that a lot of other things seem to disappear, because there's, there's certainly a place for having pride in the suburb. So, but yeah, like I said, I'll just continue doing what I'm doing. Certainly enjoying the roller coaster, I'd call it, and making some good friends along the way, which is good. So really enjoying it. Yeah.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you. Rupinder, your thoughts looking ahead?
That's the thing. That the councillors are for the community. So either as a candidate or if you are in chair. So I guess if people are approaching you to discuss something, and if it's in our area we can resolve it, why not? I'll be putting my hand up to where I can sort of support locals, if it's an individual or if it's a small business, in whatever way that, if I could support them, yes, I will be definitely. It's not just that as a candidate I need them to vote for me, that I can go in the office and then support them. No, it's not that case. As Shane said, it's about building your friends or building your community, and you're part of the community. So I'll be always available if somebody needs me down the track, even if I get elected or not.
Great, fantastic. Thank you, Rupinder. Justin.
Thanks, Steve. Look, moving forward or the week ahead, I'm looking forward to continually engaging with everyone, discussing, answering questions, hearing any issues, and I've heard some really, really interesting topics, several things I've never considered. Look, a couple of constant questions that come up is whether or not, I'm living in the city of Frankston, and if I actually live in the ward I represent. We still have those sort of questions around political leanings, whether or not we've got ambitions for state and federal and whatnot. Happy to keep answering all of those questions, covering it off today for anyone that hasn't asked me. No, not affiliated, associated or endorsed by. Yes, I live in the city of Frankston, and yes, I live in the Northwest Ward. No, I don't have any political ambitions at this point in time to go to state or federal, nor can I see it on the cards in the future. But look, getting back to the point at hand, I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation, and that doesn't mean, up until the 23rd of October, and then everything goes quiet, and then hopefully all of us here, are on a new formed council, and then you don't hear from us anymore. The conversation will need to continue, and it doesn't matter if one or more of us don't get in. Let's keep this conversation running. At the end of the day, the resounding message has been consultation, participation. Let's keep the conversation going. So I'm hoping that's what the outcome of whoever gets in will be in terms of council moving forward.
Fantastic. Thank you, Justin.
Sure.
Sue.
Great, thank you. Yes, I sort of follow what everyone's saying around, and particularly Brad saying about the elections going ahead. I think, yes, it's been a case of everybody learning a whole new set of skills around the social media platform, but actually that has in some ways been a level playing field. People have had the opportunity to post a Facebook page or a website, or put up a phone number, or a way of getting in contact with you. And it's been interesting that not all candidates have done that. The choice has been there, the opportunity has been there to make yourself accessible. So that's been good. I think the one difficulty has been for those parts of the community who aren't internet savvy. So I'm acutely aware that there are a number of people that won't have been in contact with us unless they've got a family member or someone supportive who can help them with that. And as people over 70 do have to vote, I'm mindful that there'll be a lot of people that won't have had access. However, it is good that we've gone ahead, and yes, definitely the message is we want to change. And I think the fact that there are the number of candidates that have put their hand up, that's sort of been spurred on by general energy in the community to have some different faces and some different voices talking about what can happen in council.
Yeah.
So this week for me will be continuing questions. I was just looking at the list of things here. So overall, I think there is a very strong theme. One about consultation, collaboration, talking to people, engaging people in conversations about matters that affect them in their community or in their street, or to do with some aspect of where they live. But also what I'm starting to hear is people also want feedback. So those people who might have been in contact with a councillor or someone at the council, and actually this morning I heard a story of a whole street of people who all phoned and raised the same question, and not one of them ever had any feedback. So that type of dialogue, so is it a cultural thing? Was it a too hard question that nobody wanted to answer? Or, you know, there are other things that took priority, but what I'm hearing is good conversations, people who are prepared to make difficult decisions and say no, there's nothing we can do when that's the case. So at least people have a response to a situation, or perhaps a signposted to another place to get feedback. So that's the general theme, and I'm sure I'll hear more of that this week. But in the past week, it was everything from community-run preschool hubs. I mean, that's something I know nothing about, so that was raised as a question for me. You know, residents who back onto the light industry at Hartnett Road. There's various issues that come up there with heavy trucks and noise and exhaust pollution. Drug dealing on corners, people, you know, a young family I met who really want their daughter to grow up and be able to walk to school, but hubby had seen this drug deal going down on a corner, and, you know, how can they address that, and what role does council have in things like that, along with parking and poor fencing and outdated playground facilities. So there is a lot of the small stuff out there, which is great to hear, but that overarching, talk to us, hear our feedback, acknowledge our feedback, and then together as a community, we can really go forward and make some great things happen. So yes, so more of the same this week. Keep those questions.
Great, thank you very much. So I'm looking forward to the end of next week. It feels like it's been an unending campaign. I'm really looking forward to having more conversations with people next week, though. I've had some brilliant conversations. And actually made some new friends through the campaign as well, including many of the people on this discussion as well. I'm also looking forward to the opportunity of getting into the hairdresser, and irrespective of the election outcome, getting an updated photo. But more importantly, I think the thing that I've picked up over the last couple of weeks, and it's a theme that's really picked up as we get into next week, is the appetite for change. I don't think I've spoken, and yeah, had some really good conversations with people who actually disagree with me on some issues, and we've had a really good conversation about it, and we still disagree, but there's mutual respect there, and that's what's really quite important. And I think that's something that hopefully will carry through next week and as we move into the next council term. I'm going to say thank you to everyone who has joined us for this conversation today. Apologies for Peter Malone. He had to go and do some caregiving. But we're back on Tuesday for our final policy discussion, for our candid conversation, which is titled Policy Overload. It'll be the last chance for the candidates with whom we have been conducting these conversations to put their final pitch. If you haven't voted, you've got to get your ballot paper either dropped off at the VEC office or in the letterbox no later than 6 p.m. on Friday. So this is a really important election for Frankston. We can't have 4 more years of the same. So if you haven't voted, read the candidate statements, do your research on the candidates. You've got 6 great people on here that you can also vote for if you choose. But think carefully about making sure that you do get your vote in. If you've already voted and you've sealed your envelope and you've left it on your mantelpiece or your kitchen table, forget to stick it in the letterbox. And also, if you haven't received a ballot paper, do call the VEC tomorrow to make sure that that can be resolved. But thank you everyone for watching. Thank you for those of you who will watch later on. Have a great evening, and I look forward to talking to you all again on Tuesday. Thanks very much and good night.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Ian.